Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Almost 30 years ago to this very day, congressmen of the Congress Party in India gathered in the residence of somebody called Rampal Saroj, who was a senior Congress legislator at the time. And in a room probably half the size of this, the whole of the Congress Party sat down on tables and chairs and discussed, in the next 5 days, how we're going to rape as many Sikh women as we can, how we're going to butcher and kill as many Sikh men as we can, and how we're going to loot as much Sikh property as we can in 5 days. They discussed this in a really cool, calm, orderly manner. But why did this meeting take place? Before I go on to the actual whole episode of Delhi 1984, just to give you a bit of background, Sikhs from 1947, ever since India had become free, or so-called free, after the partition, had many, many grievances. Water was being robbed and looted, our electricity was being taken away, so was our grain. We weren't recognised as Sikhs in the Indian constitution. And we faced many grave injustices. Punjab had been split into half, our language wasn't recognised. And all of this was crystallised in the form of protests. And the figurehead of that protest, his name was Sant Janel Singh Khalsa Bhindranwale. At that time, when Sant Bhindranwale took over the grievances of the Sikhs and tried to challenge the Indian establishment, Indira Gandhi was a failing Prime Minister at that time. Economically, she had failed. India was in crisis. And she'd also been charged for using illegal state machinery during her elections. So they wanted to arrest her. Effectively, she dissolved Parliament and ruled as a dictator because she didn't want to get arrested. So she was in crisis. So Indira Gandhi needed to be seen as the saviour of India. She needed to be seen as the Durga of Mother India, saving them from the big bad terrorist, Sant Bhindranwale and his men, and indeed the whole Sikh nation. So who better to identify and use as a scapegoat than people like you who are sat here today, Sikhs of Guru Nanak, easily identifiable by your appearance and your lifestyle. So she effectively criminalised Sikhi. Now if anybody wants any proof that Sikhi had been criminalised, that it almost become illegal to be a Sikh, then you just need to go back to some of the documents that were released in February. If a lot of you may know about the British collusion. This British government released in its 30-year rule, every 30 years they release documents. One of the documents was a letter that Indira Gandhi sent to Margaret Thatcher. And this was a month after Blue Star. And in the first 2 sentences of that letter, and I read this before I sort of made a video response to it, she says that of all the malefactors, those Sikhs who wear the religious garb are the most dangerous. And she writes this in her letter. She's effectively saying that anybody who has any faith in Sikhi or shows it in any outward way by wearing a chunni or a kara or a dastar, they are the most dangerous. So this is what Indira Gandhi's sort of outlook was towards Sikhi and its Sikhs. And what was her masterpiece in that Operation Blue Star? Under the pretext of using Sant Bhindranwale, she mobilised nearly all of India's armed forces, and India is the 3rd world's largest army. She mobilised the land, the navy and the air force for the holy shrine of the Sikhs. Tanks that were used against Pakistan and weigh tons, and they can fire from a range of 3 miles away. 12 of those were parked on our Harmandir Sahib and blasted the Akal Takht to pieces. The upshot of that, when you use that many armaments against a civilian population, against a non-military target, a full-throttle military siege, you're going to have casualties. And this is what Indira Gandhi wanted. She wanted to give Sikhs a big bloody punch on the nose to say that if you want to ask for your rights, this is what you'll get from us. 5,000 people were butchered in that week during Operation Blue Star. 5,000 innocent civilians. And we lost a lot of our cream. Not only Sant Bhindranwale, a magnanimous leader, a leader that we probably hadn't seen for 100 years and most likely we won't see for another 100. But a lot of the Sikhs there were intellectuals, people like yourselves, people who went to colleges. They finished off the cream of our movement just in Operation Blue Star alone. But if you look back in Sikh history, we are the sons and daughters of Marda Gambhra Guru Gobind Singh, and anybody who's ever looked towards Harmandir Sahib as a target has always been sort of brought to justice within, why would you think you could maybe tell me, 2 months, is it? About 2 months. Within 2 months, whether it's Masaranga or Amit Shah Abdali or Indira Gandhi or even General Dyer, people have always been brought to justice for casting their evil eye on Harmandir Sahib. And Indira Gandhi had to pay that price. So after ordering Operation Blue Star and the death of 5,000 people, of our people, she paid the ultimate price. October 31st, 1984, in a couple of days, it will be the 30th anniversary. Bhai Beyant Singh and Bhai Satwant Singh, Indira Gandhi's Sikh bodyguards, who incidentally have their own personal heroic stories, which we can't get into now. They brought Indira Gandhi to justice and shot her dead, assassinated her on that day. Yet the loss of Indira Gandhi's life triggered mayhem in Delhi for the next 5 days. An open season was declared on Sikhs. But we're often told that what happened in Delhi was a riot. And even to this day, we haven't been able to define what happened in Delhi as a genocide. So what I want you to do, as I go through this talk, keep in your mind riot or genocide. And I'll just give you a brief description of what a riot is. A riot is a violent disturbance of the peace by crowds. Genocide. From the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, Article 2 says that genocide in the present convention means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethical, racial or religious group as such, either killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part, or imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, what a genocide is. Just keep in your mind riot or genocide as I go through along. So after Indira Gandhi had been shot on October 31st, 1984, she was rushed to the All India Medical Institute for research. And she was pronounced dead in the afternoon on October 31st, 1984. On All India Radio and Doordarshan TV, which is controlled by the government, so the radio and television, provocative shouts and slogans were being aired on national radio and TV. Some of the slogans included "Khoon ka badla khoon se lenge," which means we want blood for blood. And some of the other ones were "Sardaron ki gadar," which means get all the Sardars and kill them. This was being allowed to relay on TV and radio. What effectively, I think, sealed the death warrant and sort of symbolized that Sikhs weren't going to be safe in Delhi for the next 5 days was when President Zail Singh, and I use the word Singh very loosely, when President Zail Singh arrived at the hospital to pay his respects to Indira Gandhi, and his ambassador car was attacked by a mob of Hindus, government-sponsored mobs. At that time, if the President of India wasn't safe from the mobs because he wore a bug, for the next 5 days, ask yourself the question, who would be safe? Which Sikhs on the ground, normal civilians like us, would be safe? And just to make sure that your ordinary Hindu in India, in Delhi at the time, didn't have any compassion for Sikhs, not all Hindus sort of believed these rumours, but certain rumours were sort of sent out in the media, on the streets, in the newspapers, just so there was a real hatred of Sikhs at the time. And some of the rumours were this: Khalistan had been declared in Punjab, and dead bodies of Hindus were arriving in Delhi from Punjab on trains. This was one of the rumours that was started. The second rumour started was that Sikhs had poisoned the water in Delhi to kill the Hindus. And the third one was Sikhs were distributing mithai after Indira Gandhi had been killed. So these three rumours were sort of banded across Delhi. And before I get into some of the details of it, just to give you some figures, because if you want to organise a riot or something, it takes some kind of planning. But to get to these kind of figures I'm going to tell you now, that does suggest some kind of government influence and government involvement. Official figures, this is from India itself, say that 2,733 Sikhs have been killed over the course of 4 or 5 days. But this figure doesn't include the Sikhs that were killed on buses or in taxis. INSAF, an organisation that's doing quite a lot of work today, say unofficially their figure is 5,000 were killed, 1,300 widows were created and 4,000 orphans. The People's Union for Civil Liberties and the People's Union for Democratic Rights say that you could double those figures, each and every one. So they estimate 10,000 over 4 or 5 days. They estimate 3,000 widows and 8,000 orphans. But how could this be possible? How can you possibly kill that many Sikhs over the course of 3 or 4 days? Especially when world leaders, diplomats were arriving from all over the world for Indira Gandhi's funeral. How can you possibly exterminate that many people in such a short space of time? Because even with the power of social media now, when we want to organise a protest or we want to organise a programme or we're trying to get a movement going, despite the fact that we've got Facebook and Twitter and YouTube at our hands, we've got telephones, WhatsApp, whatever we've got, it's still hard to mobilise that many people. This is 30 years ago without any WhatsApp, without Facebook, without Twitter, without YouTube, without proper television and radio. How were that many people killed in such a short space of time? So we'll just go through some of the methodology that was used. And this sort of indicates whether we're talking about a riot or a genocide. The real smoking gun is the size of the weapons that were used. Of each of their witness testimonies and all the affidavits that were given, they all say the same thing, that they all had the same length of bamboo stick to beat the men with, the same size bamboo stick. Each witness testimony also talks about this sort of flammable white powder, that when they threw it on a Sikh, on a victim, it was like acid. That kind of stuff is hard to get. Kerosene, petrol. It is virtually impossible for someone to get hold of kerosene, especially 30 years ago in Delhi. But one of the main congressmen from the Congress party had a kerosene depot. And kerosene was probably the most prominent weapon used against the Sikhs that time. Pouring petrol over them, kerosene, and then setting them on fire. So if this was a spontaneous riot, if all of a sudden people thought, oh, our mother India, Indira Gandhi's been shot dead by these horrible Sikhs, we must kill the Sikhs. If this was a sudden outpouring of emotion that your mother India has died, how did everybody within 24 hours have the same weapons, the same white powder, same size bamboo sticks and kerosene? In 24 hours. Some of the gangs, most of the gangs weren't recognised by the locality there. So they were released. We're talking about ardent rapists, ardent murderers, drug dealers being released from prison and being set about in Delhi. To do that, it takes some unbelievable transportation. To be able to transport gangs that aren't known to a locality and take them somewhere else. So someone who lives in Tilak Bihar is taken to the central Delhi. He needs some transportation. Each gang had amazing transportation, and some of the congressmen had their own buses, had their own bus companies. Again, this doesn't suggest something that was spontaneous. And let's look at the strategy now. The strategy that was used. Because of all the victims that we talked to, and we've talked to some of the victims ourselves as well, they all talk about the same strategy that was used. The first one was that the police would come into a Sikh home or a Sikh Gurdwara and disarm all the Sikhs that were there. Your natural reaction when you're faced by mobs and rioters is to grab your weapons and protect yourself and your loved ones. So people often say, even in the commissions, that the police stood by idly and watched all this sort of killing take place. Well, I would argue that they didn't idly do anything because they were busy disarming the Sikhs that were there to defend themselves. So that was the first wave. Cops go in and disarm the Sikhs. The second wave comes in then, and these are the gangs. They come in, rape the mothers and daughters regardless of how old they are, kill the men and the boys regardless of how old they are, and then they leave. The third wave, and this is all from testimonies, the third wave would come in and loot all the belongings. TV, radios, beds, clothes, whatever, jewelry. And then the last wave would come in, and this is how synchronized this was. The last wave would come in and destroy all evidence, set the house on fire. And just to stress how organized this thing was, whether it was a riot or genocide, again, have a think about it when I talk about this point, is the precision with which this plan was executed. No stray dog or no non-Sikh was caught up in this 5 days of frenzied, brutal violence. No stray dog was caught up in this. This was precise. There are photos that you can see on the internet of a Sikh home or a Sikh business on fire. 3 or 4 houses or 3 or 4 shops later, everything is completely intact, and then the next house is completely on fire, or the next shop is completely on fire. And these were Sikh homes or Sikh businesses. Now the question to ask yourself is, in Delhi, shop signs are either in Hindi or in English. So how would they possibly know what a Sikh shop is? How would you know what a Sikh home is? If someone was to say to you now, here's some kerosene, here's some guns, go and kill as many Sikhs as you can in Birmingham, how would you know where they live? And this again is the smoking gun. Voters lists. Congressmen, politicians, MPs like Sajjan Kumar, Jagdish Titler, Kamal Nath, H.K. Bhagat, Darshan Shastri, and a whole host of others were giving out voters lists to the mobs. They were giving voters lists who voted for them. So it's like going to the Birmingham Library and looking at the electoral register and seeing where people live. 30 years ago, they were handing these voters lists out. On 31st October, on that very night, Congress party officials provided assailants with these voters lists and school registration forms. So they got in contact with local authorities to see where are Sikh kids living. So they used school registration and ration cards. The lists were used to find the location of Sikhs' homes and businesses. And what was even more galling was that on that night, in preparation for the 1st of November, they would mark Sikh homes with paint with the letter S. So they'd use these voters lists, these school registrations, and ration cards to identify homes and businesses. The next wave of people then paint them with an S. They didn't leave anything to chance because they knew that the majority of the mobs and the criminals they were going to use were illiterate. They didn't know how to read, so they couldn't even read the voters list. So they marked them with paint to leave nothing to chance. And this is what's even more frightening about how uniform this was, whether this was a riot or an actual genocide. And I'll just narrate a little story, and it probably speaks volumes for Delhi as a whole. One man, Amar Singh, he escaped the initial attack. So they came into his locality, and he escaped the initial attack because a Hindu neighbor had saved him. So we saw this Hindu guy had seen all these burning Sikhs. He saw Amar Singh, grabbed him, and took him to his house. So Amar Singh escaped the initial attack because his neighbor saved him. However, a group of 18 men, 18 of them, came looking for Amar Singh. So in all this death and destruction that's going on, Amar Singh escapes, a normal individual guy like us, and 18 men come looking for him, and they knock on his neighbor's door and say, "Where is Amar Singh?" The neighbor said, "I don't know." They pulled out a list and said, "Here is a list, we haven't crossed his name off." This has been testified by the Hindu neighbor, that we haven't crossed his name off. We need to kill him. And if all this wasn't enough to suggest that this wasn't some spontaneous outbreak of emotion at the death of Indira Gandhi, but a planned genocide, just look at some of the government involvement. Because if that doesn't suggest government involvement, this definitely will. Rajiv Gandhi, at the death of his mother, famously coined the phrase that when a big tree falls, it's natural that the earth around it will shake, suggesting that there will be some shaking of the ground with the death of my mother. And he's openly said this. In a lot of the witness testimonies, they talk about a killing competition. And this is seen with the eyes of the victims. Sajjan Kumar and Jagdish Tytler, two MPs from the Congress Party, fierce rivals before 1984, saying to their sort of gangs, Jagdish Tytler has killed this many in Tilak Vihar. You need to kill this many. Why are we behind? We aren't meeting our targets. This was from the witness testimonies. Even the 2011 cable WikiLeaks, and this is from 2011, revealed that the United States was convinced about the complicity of the Indian government, ruled by the Indian National Congress, and termed it as opportunism and hatred from the Congress government against Sikhs. And this was in 2011 from the cable WikiLeaks. So we've got the voters list, we've got the school registration forms, we've got the strategy, we've got the weapons. We've even had them admitting that yes, we will take some kind of revenge from Sikhs. And then I've also told you about some of the statistics, but what often I fear, especially in the talks I do, is that we often get lost in numbers and we sort of get desensitized. They just become statistics to us, like 5,000 during Operation Blue Star, 25,000 during Operation Woodrose, 5,000 during Operation Shuddhikaran, 5,000, 10,000 November Delhi, this much in Operation Black Thunder. So we sort of get lost in them. So I just want to highlight three key cases that probably speak volumes for what was happening in Delhi. And this is probably a bit more stark than the example I gave of President Zail Singh. The first one is Rakabganj Gurdwara. Rakabganj Gurdwara was attacked, and it's a historical Gurdwara, attacked for 5 relentless hours. Pelted, the Sikhs that were in there, the Sevadars, the Granthis, the Sangat, were burnt alive, every single one of them, man, woman and child. 5 hours, that Gurdwara was almost reduced to rubble. Ironically, tragically and ironically, Rakabganj Gurdwara represents our 9th Guru, Guru Tegh Bahadur, who gave his life in Delhi, in Chandni Chowk, to save the Hindu faith. Rakabganj Gurdwara was attacked. Police Commissioner Subhash Tandon, who was the police commissioner of Delhi at the time, confirmed that Kamal Nath, who served in the Indian cabinet after 1984, was leading the mobs towards the Rakabganj Gurdwara. Like I said, all Sevadars, all Sangat were killed. But the point is this. Rakabganj Gurdwara sits opposite India's parliament, a stone's throw away from India's parliament. If one of our historic Gurdwara that sits opposite India's parliament wasn't safe from looting, rape, pillage, murder and fire, again, what house would be? Secondly, Group Captain Manmohan Veer Singh Talwar. He was a recipient of the Maharaj Veer Chakra, which is a medal for displaying outstanding courage and bravery in the Indian army. So this guy was a fierce Indian, a loyal Indian, who was one of India's generals. The mobs came to his house and shot at it. Veer Singh Talwar, being the military man that he is, grabbed hold of his arms and started shooting back. Until the police, who he thought had come to protect him and his family, came in and disarmed him, went in their jeeps and left. What another police officer done with Veer Singh Talwar, the military man, was they arrested him and his 4 sons and took him to Tihar jail, where they were tortured relentlessly for about 7 months. If this was the respect a national hero got on November 1st, 1984, someone who had sacrificed for his country, what happened to the ordinary citizen? Soldiers who were returning from the border of Pakistan, soldiers who were serving for India on the borders, who were returning home for Diwali, for Bandi Chhor, on trains in their Indian Army uniforms were dragged off the trains and slaughtered. And you can read these testimonies on the internet. Go to INSAF or the People's Union for Civil Liberties. So even fierce, loyal Indian soldiers weren't safe. But this often suggests that this was all about killing men, butchering men. But there's something that people often don't like to talk about when it comes to 1984, especially November, and that is the rape of Sikh women, because it's a subject that people don't really want to touch. But this was another tool that was used to subjugate our community. And I'll go through just a little example. Many women, children were raped, and if you read H.S. Fulkar's book, When a Tree Shook Delhi, or you read Are You Accused by Janelle Singh, there's a few other books that you can read out there. Some of the things that the women actually went through, even the Scorched Lilies of 1984, that's another great book. Some of the things that our women went through from the age of 80 all the way to children from the age of 4, being gang raped in front of their fathers and brothers. And I'll just give you a little example. In a village called Chiller, it's called Chillergaon. For 30 days, a few Sikh women, well I say a few, probably 20 to 30 Sikh women, had been taken to Chillergaon, locked in a room. And when the mobs were sort of tired from putting ties around Sikh necks, when they were tired from burning our Gurdwara, when they were tired from killing our children, they had a place in Chillergaon, in a couple of houses, where they could go and rape these Sikh girls. A bit like the Yazidi women that are facing brutal rape from the ISIS today. They were locked up in these houses and being brutally, mercilessly raped for about 3-4 days. Some say even up to a month. There was an officer, a low-level officer, his name was Jukti Ram. Jukti Ram was so enraged that so many Sikh girls were being raped over the course of 3 days in a house, and it was going on under the nose of the police and law enforcement. He decided, I'm going to take my police jeep and I'm going to go and rescue these girls. He was told by his superior that if you want to rescue those Sikh girls, if in the process anything happens to the jeep, if it gets any damage, then you will have to pay for it. So November 1984, in Delhi, the price of 30 Sikh women and their honour was worth less than a police jeep. I'm just going to go through now briefly some of the commissions that went on after this, because after India had decided that 3 or 4 days is enough to get what we want, they decided to set up some commissions. And the commissions were to try and get to the truth of what happened. Who was complicit in it, who knew about it, who tried to cover it up. Essentially, the government was investigating itself, and these are some of the commissions. If you read them in full, they are actually mind-blowing. I'm just going to give you a little flavour about what these commissions were. So after the carnage, after all these lives lost, this is some of the stuff that the government done to try and put some balm on our wounds. So very briefly, the first commission that was set up was appointed, it was called the Marwar Commission, was to look at the role of the police during the Delhi genocide of 1984. And it was appointed in November 1984, straight after. And Ved Marwar, who was appointed to sort of investigate it, he was the additional commissioner of Delhi police. While he was investigating it, he was interrupted by the Home Ministry and told not to go any further. The most important part of his investigation, which were his handwritten notes, weren't passed on to the next commission. So 10 commissions in total, this was the first one. The second commission, so after this, they got rid of Ved Marwar's commission, they got rid of all his handwritten notes, they started the Misra Commission to look into Delhi 1984. The Misra Commission was the person appointed to investigate it. His name was Justice Raghunath Misra, and he was a sitting judge of the Indian Supreme Court. Misra said at the start of his investigation, and this is to quote, the terms of his reference stated that in no part of his terms of reference to identify any person and recommended the formation of 3 committees. So basically he said that in my investigation, it's not in my terms of reference to identify any of the perpetrators. Human Rights Watch criticised this commission because it didn't recommend the criminal prosecution of any individual. So what the commission was about, God only knows. And just to make it even worse, the People's Union for Civil Liberties criticised the Mustard Commission because it kept the details of the accused a secret and released the details of the victims. That was their commission. The next commission was the Kapoor Mittal Committee. This looked on at the role of the police again, because the first one had completely failed. This consisted of Justice M.L. Jain, who was a former judge of Delhi High Court, and Mr. A.K. Banerjee, who was a retired Inspector General of Police. This committee recommended registration of cases against Sajjan Kumar in August 1987, but no case was ever registered against him. So they identified the main politicians who were handing out the voters list, but no criminal case was ever brought against them. In 1989, the High Court quashed the appointment of this committee, so they got rid of it again. So what do they do in their... they appoint another commission called the Poti Rocha Committee, and this was started in 1992, again investigated. Rocha issued recommendations for filing cases based on witness testimonies of the victims and the violence they had been subjugated to. Again, they wanted a case registered against Sajjan Kumar. A CBI team went to Kumar's house to file the case against him. His supporters locked the investigators up, and they beat them up and sort of threatened them with death if they persisted in their investigation. As a result of this intimidation, this committee expired. So they got rid of that as well. So then they say, let's appoint another committee, the Jain Agarwal Committee. This committee, again, based on witness testimonies, they wanted cases registered against H.K.L. Bhagat, Sajjan Kumar, Dharamdas Shastri and Jagdish Tyler. This committee wound up in August 93, not a single case was registered against any individual. The Ahuja Committee, all they looked at was the numbers killed. This is where our figure came from. This was appointed in 87, and they derived the figure of 2,733, and not one single recommendation to arrest any politician, any one of the mobs, or anyone from the police. So this one's a really galling one now as well. This was the Dillon Committee. And their job was to look at rehabilitation of the victims. So how can we help these people once we've killed them, once we've maimed them and injured them sort of forever, permanently injured them? How can we sort of rehabilitate them? This was headed by Gurdial Dillon in 1985. And this is what it said. One of its major recommendations was that business establishments owned by Sikhs, which had insurance cover, but whose insurance claims were not settled by insurance companies on the technical ground that they didn't cover riots, that they should all be paid compensation. So riots didn't cover Sikh businesses for insurance. So this recommended that any business, Sikh business that was affected, or Sikh family affected by the so-called riots, they should be given compensation. The government of India rejected this recommendation, and as a result, insurance claims were rejected by insurance companies all over the country. So not a single Sikh got any insurance. List is on and on, to be honest. There's 2, 3. There's a Narula committee. There's a Nanavati commission. There's loads. But they all point to the same thing. All this does is serve to sort of cement our belief and what we've been crying about for 30 years, that this was an organised massacre and not a riot. Because 10 commissions and 30 years later, not a single person has been arrested. Not a single person has been brought to justice, despite the fact that we have countless testimonies. But despite these commissions, despite these testimonies, and 30 years on now, we're discussing it today, where are the people now involved in this? Where are the victims? Where are the perpetrators? Were the perpetrators tried in some international tribunal and sent to The Hague and sent to prison for war crimes against Sikhs? Are the victims now affluent and are they flourishing now? Have they had justice 30 years later? Let's just have a look. Jagdish Tyler, who I've mentioned a few times, and you can look him up on the internet, he's on YouTube, someone who was the main player during November 1984. At the time, he was a normal MP for the Congress Party. After those 4 days of killings, where he produced a dazzling performance, where he killed probably more than Sajjan Kumar and any other Congress politician, he became the Union Minister of State for Overseas and Indian Affairs. This guy, who was a normal MP, entered India's cabinet after these killings. Kamal Nath, and the list is endless, so I'm just going to pick a few. Kamal Nath, also a normal MP at the time, who again was a major player in distributing kerosene for the mobs. He was inducted to the Union Council of Ministers as a Minister of Environment and Forests in June 1991. From 1995 to 1996, he served as a Union Minister of State for Textiles. He's currently the Minister for Urban Development. This is how he was punished. Narasimha Rao, he was the Home Minister of India when Sikhs were getting butchered in '84. 7 years later, he becomes the Prime Minister. This is how they were punished. What about from our side? What about the victims? For them, the massacre continues. The victims of Delhi, all the widows and all the orphans, were shoved out of their homes and taken into little colonies called the Widows' Colony. It's called the Widows' Colony, a colony for widows. Prominent widow colonies, Tilak Vihar, Tilak Nagar. So here's the real tragedy for them, because they're living in squalor now, chronic drug use for their children. They can't get jobs, they're not given jobs. They're living in squalor, their kids are addicted to drugs, they can't get jobs. And the people who raped them, who murdered their men, walk past them as MPs, or they look at them as cabinet ministers. But that's not the only tragedy for these victims, who continue to suffer to this very day. Not only were they shoved in a little corner in Delhi to say, here you little victims, here you stay here, get out of the way, we don't want to see you, we don't want to hear you. These widow colonies, they were promised that you can live here for free, despite the fact we've taken everything away from you and we've destroyed your lives. What we will let you do is live in this dump for free. So you carry on, you and your kids, your drug addicted kids. Recently, Sheila Dixit, who's a major player in Delhi, said that all Sikhs living in the widow colony have to pay now. And they have to pay backdated from when they first moved in, or when they were first shoved in. Harpreet Singh, who was allotted living quarters, 16 years later, he received a bill for 32,000 rupees and interest added every year. This is someone who'd lost his father, his two brothers, his mom, his dad, his chachi's kids, his dad's kids, his mommy, his masiya, his neighbours, his friends. And he gets a bill for 32,000 rupees. As we speak, as I stand here today, a lot of those houses in the widows' colony are being sealed, and those Sikh families are being thrown out. That's the difference of where we are 30 years later. The perpetrators, the killers of our people, are not only walking free, they are the upholders of law and order in India. And the victims who lost everything continue to get massacred on a day-to-day basis. Yet there's women like Jagdish Kaur, who lost 25 odd members of her family, including 3 of her sons, in front of her very eyes, who still goes to court every single time to try and bring some justice for her family and others. But is it enough for Saab Singh from RajoanaTV to come here to Ashton Union almost 30 years later and talk about these things? 30 years later, I was what, 3 years old when this happened. Most of you probably weren't even born. So, after all this, are there any solutions for us? With all the cards stacked against us, are there any solutions for us? One of the more immediate solutions for us, and this is where people like yourselves, the intellectual property of our movement, the students, this is where people like you do come in, is that to this very day, after what I've described very briefly, and there's so much more information there, after what I've described very briefly, it doesn't take a genius to work out that this was planned and it was a genocide. But to this very day, we, as a Sikh Qawm, the sons and daughters of Guru Gobind Singh, who are supposed to be the soldiers of humanity, people who rescue other people, we can't even term this, to this very day, as a genocide. It's still termed as a riot. If we can get this even labelled and defined as a genocide, we get into the realms of war crimes. This is where we want people like Sajjan Kumar, Jagdish Thaitla. This is where we want them, Amitabh Bachchan, people like these who incited the mobs. This is where we want them in war crimes. We want them in The Hague, and we want to get them where they should be, which is behind bars. We want that independent public inquiry. Again, you guys as intelligent individuals, look at the country that we live in. Hillsborough happened how many decades ago, but to this day they've had independent public inquiries as to what were the failings, why did this happen. 30 years later, we have had no public independent inquiry. All the commissions I listed was the government investigating itself. We've had no one there. Again, this is something we need to press for in the short term. But the question I want to ask is this. Even if we do get this termed and defined as genocide, even if we do get people like Amitabh Bachchan and Sajjan Kumar, Jagdish Thaitla, and all these other people behind bars, even if we get to rehabilitate all the victims, even if we give their children jobs, what has changed in India in the past 30 years to make sure this massacre never happens again? What law has been enacted to safeguard us from another genocide? What has changed to stop someone like Modi, the current Prime Minister of India, who already has told the Sikhs last year, when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, to get out of Gujarat because you don't belong here, go back to Punjab. Someone who's the Prime Minister now, when he decides actually these Sikhs need to be taught one more bloody lesson, what's stopping that happening again? That's something to ask yourselves. So how important is a discussion about Delhi 1984, 30 years later? Recently, they found in Haryana, which is outside of Punjab, used to be in Punjab, they found in Haryana in 2011 a mass grave where under the ashes of a burnt Gurdwara, they found 60 or 70 Sikhs that time and humanity have completely forgotten. 60 or 70 Sikhs, their bones were discovered under the Gurdwara. This was in Haryana, miles and miles away from Delhi. So this isn't just sort of something that happened in Delhi. This was widespread across the nation. How many other mass graves are there in India that we don't even know about? Another reason why it's important for us to talk about this still, 30 years later, and not to draw a line under this, is because Sajjan Kumar, who was named in all of those commissions, he was recently acquitted from the Indian Supreme Court and given a clean chit, saying that this guy has done nothing wrong. So 30 years later, when we eventually get the main perpetrator, just one, into the Supreme Court, we're told, nah, he can walk free. And when he did arrive to the Supreme Court, and this Bibi Jagdish Kaur, who I've already mentioned, who lost 25 members of her family, she went to court with her only one remaining son to try and look Sajjan Kumar in the eyes, while he arrived with 100 government-protected commandos. And he was given an acquittal. They couldn't even let one of theirs go. From 1984 to the present day, I'm not talking about Delhi, I'm talking India as a whole, 250,000 people, 250,000, 250,000 Sikhs have perished under the boots of Mother India. But they couldn't even let one go. Not even one. And we're supposed to forget these 250,000. Another reason why it's important that we still have a discussion and a dialogue about Delhi 1984 and some of the other genocides that happened is because of the dual system that still operates in India. I've already mentioned Sajjan Kumar's been acquitted. Jagdish Tyler, somebody else who was mentioned, one of the major players, he's also been acquitted. But somebody like Professor Davinder Pal Singh Pullar, they want to murder and execute. Look at the dual system that's in operation. Countless people have put Sajjan Kumar, Jagdish Tyler at the scene. I saw him pointing at a house saying, that's where a Sikh house is, go and burn them. I saw him pointing at the Garbganj Gurdwara saying, go and burn it down. I saw him do this, I saw him do that. Professor Davinder Pal Singh Pullar, of the 200 odd witnesses that were brought up in his case, not a single person could place Davinder Pal Singh Pullar at the scene of the crime, not a single person. 2 judges from the Supreme Court said there's not a shred of evidence against Professor Pullar, yet they still want to execute him or keep him in prison for the rest of his life. Look at the dual system that's in operation. Kishori Lal, a butcher in more ways than one, a butcher by profession, a butcher by trade, and a butcher of Delhi as well, of 1984. He admitted that with my own butcher's cleaver, I chopped countless Sikhs. He was put in prison as a token gesture, and he was released a few years ago, Kishori Lal. Yet Balwant Singh Rajoana, Jagtar Singh Hawara, and countless other Sikhs are languishing in Indian jails without a shred of evidence under draconian laws. So that's the dual system. And probably something that's a bit more poignant for us is the rape of Damini, the girl on the Delhi bus. I'm sure a lot of you remember from a couple of years ago. Damini was on a bus 2 years ago, I think. And she was raped by 3 or 4, I think 5 or 6 guys at night on an empty bus in Delhi. She was raped savagely and then thrown by the roadside, and she died of her injuries. Quite rightly, and we support it, quite rightly those guys were condemned, and so was the act. And we hope and pray that they are given the severest sentence, because no girl should go through that. But the point for us, she was raped at night, in the dark, by a group of criminals on an empty bus. During November 1984 in Delhi, our women were raped in broad daylight. Not one, tens, hundreds, 80, 60 years old, 4 years old, by the people that were supposed to protect her, the politicians, the police, and her neighbours. This is why a discussion is still so important, because 1984 is still raw, and it makes it even more raw when you do see these incidents where they're condemned by the international community and India itself, but the value of our women is absolutely nothing. January 2014, another reason why it's so important to talk about these things. Rahul Gandhi admitted on live television in an interview with the Times Now, that congressmen were involved in the killings of Sikhs, but he refused to apologise. He squirmed in his seat for an hour, but refused to apologise. In the same month of this year, Police Commissioner Ved Marwa exposed how he was told to stop his inquiry into the killings of Sikhs. He was told, he's sort of told this to the media in January 2014, which is why, again, 1984 is still a relevant issue for us. And to be honest, it's even more sort of relevant is because, you know, had our grandparents not decided to move to this country, had they decided to move from Punjab or Delhi, wherever you're from, to this country, we could have been in one of those illegal cremation grounds. We could have had a burning tire wrapped around our neck. We could have seen our family decimated in front of our very eyes. So how do we then try and divorce ourselves from them to us? Because they're the orphans of our history. No one's going to pick us up in the middle of the night and take us away for talking about human rights. It's up to us to become their eyes and their ears and fight for their justice. And the question ultimately is, was this an isolated incident? Are we talking about Delhi, this spontaneous thing that happened in India's chapter and they're completely embarrassed by it? Because these massacres continued. 25,000 youth disappeared from our motherland, Punjab, from 1984 to 1995, 25,000 of them. Then Delhi's happened, Operation Blue Star. And apparently Sikhs have stopped dying. I'm often accused, they say that, oh come on man, Saab, you're born in this country, you were 3 years old at the time, people in Punjab or India don't talk about this, why the hell are you banging on about it? Because the Indian government don't allow me to forget. Firstly, my humanity won't allow me to forget. I'm a student of history. I've studied the First World War, the Second World War. I've studied the slave trade, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Just because I've studied these and I know about these things, it doesn't give me some kind of psychosis. It doesn't turn me into a psycho. Just because I've researched the First World War, I don't automatically hate Germans. It's something to learn from history. And we shouldn't feel bad about learning from history. But we can't even afford to become never-forgetters. We can't afford just to become commemorators, because Sikhs are dying to this day. In the last 2 or 3 years, 3 Sikhs, Darshan Singh, Balkar Singh and Jaspal Singh, have been killed on the streets of Punjab in peaceful protests by the police without a single investigation taking place. And apparently Sikhs have stopped dying. Jaspal Singh was a student like you guys, an engineering student, 18 years old. He was protesting against the death penalty in India when he was shot at point-blank range while he was doing Simran on the floor. Not a single investigation into the guy's death. And we're told to forget and move on. Which is why, I mean, even yesterday, just yesterday, multiple Sikhs were shot. 3 really gravely, and they could lose their lives in a protest, a peaceful protest in Punjab, just yesterday. So if the Indian government wanted to give you a little nudge and a prod, just to let you know that you're still slaves in that country, that was it. That you aren't going to be safeguarded. So I talk about the solutions. I talked about getting this termed as a genocide. Pushing, using your legal skills and whatever skills you've got to try and get an independent public inquiry. But then the question I asked before, and the reason why I asked it, is what has changed in that country to make sure this never happens again? And the question is nothing. The answer is nothing, sorry. So ultimately, the Indian Union, the Union of States that was created in 1947, has failed us. Completely failed us. Not only did, to free India from the clutches of imperialism from the British, Sikhs gave 90% of the sacrifices towards independence. We freed that country, fair enough. Then the very entity that gives you life, water, grain, we shared that with India as well for the next 50, 60, 70 years. Even that wasn't enough. We then go on the border of China and Pakistan, and we fight against Pakistan and China, and we win the war for them. Pakistan army admitted without the Sikhs, we wouldn't have been defeated. But even that wasn't enough. So it's time we start looking for a place in the world where we can be safeguarded, where we can live in peace. And this is when I want to finish off with Bhai Rajwana's ultimate message, because he's someone who's very current and very real and very raw. We all pledged orange for Balwant Singh Rajwana, and we put orange on our arms and our cars and our houses. But what was Bhai Rajwana's ultimate message? He was saying, despite the fact that I'm in a small, dark, dingy cell. I've been here for 17 years. I could be executed today or tomorrow, or I could be in here for the next 17 years. But from here, I'm completely free. You might be living and breathing, but from here, you're completely enslaved. His ultimate message: before you try and release me, release yourselves. Release yourselves. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.